Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for joining this mission to expand the conversation. And adjust this real quick here. All right. I've asked this question before, and I used to do it a lot when I was hunting. I used to think about a lot of things sitting in a tree in the woods. And it came to me one day, and I thought, can I ever have an original thought? And over the 20 years that I spent a lot of time hunting, I realized it's probably impossible to have an original thought. And that goes back to when I used to read a bit more of the classics, but St. Augustine, and understanding how we continuously we have an impression upon us. And so much of it is our conscious and unconscious. Let's go with this. Never let a crisis go to waste. And let's talk about Fauci and the flu that he originally was stating consistently, even till late February, that the suggestion was this was not going to be anything we needed to worry about. So, not being critical here, I'm looking back at how we got to where we're at. And the science says that the similar amount of people are going to die from this as was the flu. We didn't know how to handle it, but I really think that the transition took place when people that we don't see, the people behind the curtain, and they said, wait a minute, we're not going to let this crisis go to waste. The government consistently makes things worse. Now, if you look at what the science was telling us and what the numbers was telling us, originally that this was going to be a bad flu season, we've never decided to try to shut down the global economy because of the flu. So when I hear the words, every American life lost is a tragedy, I think you never cared about the flu before. Not to this extent that you were able to now be able to expand that much more control on the American citizenry. Shame on us for letting this happen. Let me get to a Joe Rogan, who is the greatest of all time podcaster. And I got a chance to look at one of his episodes the other day. Fantastic. And I'm a far cry from that. I mean, if we're doing this out of an office in a house, off a phone with no mic, but we're making improvements. So hang in there. And supposedly someone on his show, or he, had stated that if Thomas Jefferson was to come back, he'd be upset because we did not change the Constitution enough. That's what I'm told. Again, I haven't verified that just yet. I haven't found it. But the reality is, no. What we do understand about our founding fathers, and Thomas Jefferson was one of them, that would come back and would beat us up, yes. But not because we haven't changed it. It's because we've allowed it to have too much change. It's just the opposite. He wrote and was very clear about the tyranny of a government. Do not let the government get too big. So on that note, remember, the USA was conceived through war initially, and war was used to create and defend the principles of our constitutional republic. So if you take that and that willingness to fight, then the government has utilized this us versus them system to amplify divisions in our citizenry and take more and more power by taking more and more freedoms and liberties. Both the Democrats and the Republicans are almost equally to blame, especially in the last 120 years, 130 years. We really see where through the progressives, and that's Teddy Roosevelt and the Republican Party, the progressives on the left and the right have really accounted for an equal amount of blame, taking our freedoms and our liberties. So with nearly full compliance across academia, that's on every public school campus, on every college campus, private and public, our citizens find it more and more difficult to be engaging in the truth. On all campuses, both private and public, although the private campuses typically provide us a better opportunity to discuss the truth. Today we have a crisis, which again has been man-made in a lot of ways and made much worse by the government. And the government consistently does this. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. Ronald Reagan warned us that those should be scary words. Well, I'm from big tech, and I'm here to help. We should be equally, if not more, frightened of those words. The big lie, I talked about it yesterday. And I spent a significant amount of time, if you've not gotten a chance to watch that podcast, but I read a lot of, almost word for word, Porter Stansberry. Does a fantastic job. He's a better writer than I am. He's much more versed. It's more poignant in the way he says things. And so I read that and I think, wow, it's not to be in an echo chamber, but it's to be a vast more experience in the financial markets and the way he sees things and versed in doing this. And so I thought, I have to just read it. So I appreciate your time. But talking about the big lie, and the big lie continues to have a fairly predictable process as I see it. First, we start to hear things that seem almost revolutionary, but are contrary to the truth, but stated in such a way that people start to believe them. Partly because, well, mostly it's the educated people are saying and continually supporting these ideas in the mainstream media. And white privilege is one of those phrases. We're all in this together. It takes a village to raise a child is another phrase. And again, there's people that I agree with on a lot of things that are saying on mainstream media right now. We're all in this together. We're all Americans. We're all in this together. That is contrary to our conception as a nation and individual rights. So we need to make sure that when we hear something like that, that we say, well, no. And it's the things that we are consistently told that didn't really happen. I will say this, the absolute greatest crisis in America and for the world right now is the erosion and elimination of our freedoms and liberties in the United States of America. We are that beacon. We have more legal, L-E-G-A-L, legal immigration into this country than any other country on the planet. People are dying to get in here, not to change it. They're coming to the front door because they want to be a part of what it represents. And yet we're letting them down because we're allowing our freedoms and our liberties to be eroded at such a pace. We must get back to the beginning. We must have a revolution to take back our country as created. A peaceful revolution of the people, by the people, for the people. We can do this peacefully. This happens through dialogue. Truth will prevail. Time, what a truth teller. Time continues to shine light on our errors of diverting from our founding principles. Now, immediately, I will be called a racist for taking a stance that we need to get back to the beginning. But I am supported by wonderful people in history and even alive today. Frederick Douglass, Bob Woodson, Martin Luther King Jr., Thomas Sowell, Clarence Thomas, Walter E. Williams, K. Cole James, Ben Carson, Senator Scott, Larry Elder, and many more. They have the same perspective, historically and currently, that we need to get back to the beginning, that we don't need to throw everything out, that the Constitution of the United States is the greatest of all time, and that's how our individual liberties and freedoms, that's not racist. And they have stood up and and fought for that as much as anybody. Let's move on. This revolution, to get back to the beginning, to get back to our founding principles of our constitutional republic and truth of the Constitution, must be the most important conversation we engage in regarding governance. Otherwise, we're going to see an increased police and surveillance state, mandatory compliance with protocols from even leaving your house or your county or your state. There's going to be a good citizen scaling system that's going to be put in place for activity. And this is based on the current existence of what's going on in China. Now, I would say when we look at the people in the United States and the people even in Michigan who say, yeah, my life hasn't even changed. What do I care? Shame on you. You should care. Whenever any of our constitutional rights are suppressed, all of our constitutional rights will eventually be suppressed. So when we look around the globe and we look at the protests in Hong Kong and we say, well, I mean, that's the other side of the world. I mean, it's Hong Kong. I mean, that doesn't even affect me. And yet we know that the steps that the Chinese government, that Hong Kong was protesting against, those same steps are the almost identical steps our federal government, and even to a greater extent, our state government, has applied during this crisis. So we should be aware of what's happening. How about Chile? When the protests occurred in Chile, we said, well, I mean, that's a long ways away. It's in another hemisphere. It's in the southern hemisphere. It has nothing to do with us. It does, because Chile was the greatest example of the brightest shining star of democratic governance in the southern hemisphere. And yet, solely at first, and then all of a sudden, they had protests and death in the streets. Let's move to France. Well, but France that's a socialist country. Now, that's not the same as here. And that's France. They always get up on an uprising every 200 or 300 years. Think about what we're dismissing and the lack of empathy we have because mainstream media keeps telling us how we need to see those events take place. In the United States right now, for all of us that have been affected, because whether you want to admit it or not, every one of us has been affected by COVID-19 and the Chinese Communist Party's handling, lying, and distributing of this virus across the globe so that everybody feels the pain. So what do we know right now in regards to this? These steps will no doubt, I mean, it's not necessarily that we have a time frame for this, but we do understand that if we give the government this experience of, well, I mean, they took it pretty well. We didn't allow them to have landscaping services. Individual business owners, we pretty much shut down the vast majority of the small business and cash businesses in the state of Michigan. I mean, they didn't complain too much. So we're going to pull these restrictions off, let them get back to work, but we know we can do a little bit more than next time. And they continue to do this to us. I will fight for your right to be able to say what you want to say. And I would expect you to want to fight for all of us when we are oppressed, our constitutional rights are taken, because yours are too. Just because you didn't miss a paycheck or your life hasn't changed that much today, when your life does change in the future, you'll be calling and you'll want those of us who believe in the Constitution to be standing next to you. So what do we do right now as far as what steps do we take? Well, I think these steps will no doubt be a bit fluid in the future. But I think we need full commitment to stay the course. I see a few things here. I think we need to be willing to continue the conversation and increase our dialogue. I think we need to make sure our elected officials are held accountable, up to recall efforts if it's too far off before we have the ability to be able to vote them out of office in November. We need to make sure our elected officials know that we're paying attention exactly how they're acting right now. We also need to take legal action against China in the world courts, and we need to take legal action against our state governments in the federal court, up to and including the investigation of all bad actors, both foreign and domestic. And what does that mean exactly? Domestically, we've seen so much about foreign, but domestically, do we have bad actors domestically? Do we have people making political decisions claiming that it's based on science? Do we have people lying on death certificates so that hospitals can get more money? Because if somebody came in here and died of congestive heart failure, because that was their underlying comorbidity, but they had the COVID-19 virus, we're just going to call it COVID-19. These are domestic bad actors in the name of money. We need to investigate this. We need to pursue the truth. We also need to recognize Americans have so much more in common. And together as we the people, and through our Constitution, we can take back our country peaceably through the process. I want to thank you for subscribing. I really do appreciate the support. Please share with at least 5 people. If you've received this and you do not wish to engage in dialogue, just text stop. Thank you for all who send me ideas, the comments, and the aspects of topics to continue the real conversation. I'm James Detroit, and I'm out.